20 meters. Well, welcome everybody to the September edition of the YCARS presentation meeting. This evening we have Danny Davis KD5W, one of our club members, who has a YouTube channel called Broken Signal, and he does some great stuff there. So we're very pleased to have him join us this evening and do a presentation on Meshtastic. So Danny, without any further ado, I'll let you take it away, buddy.
All right. Hope everybody's doing good. And thanks for letting me give the presentation. We'll jump right into it. As I go, if you got questions, just holler. There's a delay there, but all right. So what is Meshtastic? Meshtastic is a open source project using LoRa technology on little, small, inexpensive devices to be able to allow basic communication in an off-grid mode. We'll dig into that a little deeper as we go.
I'd be sitting in the waiting room.
Didn't hear that. What was that? Okay. So what frequency does it run at? That would depend on where you are, if you're in Europe or North America. For North America here, we run 915 megahertz in the ISM band. You're allowed up to about 1 watt of power with that. But you could also use the 433 megahertz, but you're limited to 0.01 watt. Now, if you are a ham radio operator, like all of us are here, I think, you are allowed to then specify in the application that you are a ham radio operator and use higher power level, but at the expense of then you're not allowed to use encryption. So a lot of people ask, how far can you transmit? Distance is severely determined by the bandwidth, the spread factor, coding rate, and other factors. Line of sight is an absolute must for this. You're at 915 megahertz, so buildings, trees, things like that are definitely going to affect your signal. There is current records right now on the website listed ground to ground 158 miles and ground to air 128 miles. I thought ground to air would have been a little further than ground to ground. They're running those without any amplification with stock antennas, but they're running summit to summit to get those kind of ranges. So what can you transmit? Can you use this for voice? Short answer is no, you cannot use it for voice. And the reason being is we'll take a look at the packet that the mesh sends. Mesh is going to convert the packets to LoRa data and use that to transmit from device to device. In the header of the packet, the header is unencrypted and it'll contain the destination ID. That's the person you're wanting to communicate with. The sender ID is you. The packet ID of that individual packet, how many hops it's allowed to take, which the default is set to 3 hops, and whether you want acknowledgement or not. And default is set for acknowledgement. That's unencrypted so that it could share those packets in the mesh network. We'll get into how it does that later, but remember that that part's unencrypted. Then there's the sub packet, which is, it can be unencrypted. It can be encrypted with 128 AES 128 encryption or AES 256 encryption. There is a default public channel, and the encryption key for that is always AQ ==. There is a character limit of, I can't see my screen there. There's a character limit of 51 to 222 bytes. That's going to be determined on the spread factor, the bandwidth, and those settings that are set up. At that, that's not very much information. So basically the only thing that you could send across this is going to be character data, you know, emojis like texting, and you can send data like that, but you're not going to be able to send anything larger than that. You're not going to be able to send images. You're not going to be able to do voice or video. So what else can you transmit besides just text? Well, you could, if your device has a GPIO pins on it, you could read and write the GPIO pins across the mesh network. You could also send temperature, barometric pressure, humidity, wind direction, wind speed, things like that. And then there's also a Python command line interface to where you could pretty much send anything you want. Then your imagination would be the limit. So let's say you want to send the latest stock data you get. So you could write a Python application to gather that stock data and then send it across the network. But you don't want to do that on the public channel. You'd want to do that on a private channel that you set up. So pretty much your imagination would be the limit on what you could send. Am I going too fast in this? Any questions? All right. Okay, so how does it work? As you can see there, the little brown box with the antenna, that is a Meshtastic device. The Meshtastic device can connect to your telephone, or sorry, your cell phone or tablet through Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. And then your phone would act as a keyboard and screen for that device. It doesn't use the cellular network or any network on your phone. It uses the Meshtastic network to transmit, but it just gives you an input to it. And there are devices with a built-in screen and keyboard. And like I said, those all messages are going to be sent in LoRa symbols using a LoRa network, but it does not use the LoRa WAN network. It's creating its own network. So here's kind of typically how it would work in a mesh environment. So if you have good line of sight to the person that you're wanting to transmit to, your packet would go to them, no problem, and they could acknowledge and send a packet back. But let's say that they're out of range. Now, you could have multiple nodes in between you and the person you're wanting to send the message to. And the way Meshtastic works is it will choose 3 nodes and send it to those nodes. And it has an algorithm that I'm not quite sure how that algorithm works, but it'll offset the times and it'll send a message, wait, see if there's an acknowledgement. If not, the next one will send the message and so forth. And it could do up to 3 hops that way. So you could connect to 3 devices in between you and the other person. So it'll send it out to 3 and those will send it out. And those could send it out to 3 device or to another device and then to another device. So it could hop through the network that way. But right now it's set for a minimum or a maximum of 3 hops. So they'll get the message, they'll send it out. And then hopefully the person you're trying to receive will pick up that message and they'll send back the acknowledgement. And then it'll come back through that channel that it was sent on. Now that's able to happen because we're sending that, remember that packet that we looked at, that header is unencrypted. So it knows, hey, I have this message, it's supposed to go to this device, and it keeps track of how many hops.
Hey, Danny.
So it's smart in knowing where to send that message and if it's being reached.
Hey, Danny, excuse me.
Yes.
We got a question. Les, do you have a question?
I just wondered if we were supposed to be able to see a presentation. So he said, as you can see in the picture.
Yeah, there's one up on the screen.
Oh, okay. I must not know how to get to it. All I see is the people.
It should be. Let me pin this for everybody. Hang on. Let me try this. View options.
I don't use Zoom. This is the second time, so.
Yeah, you should be able to see it. Has everybody else seen it?
I can see it just fine.
Okay. Leslie, you can look at it on the phone.
What's your boot?
I got it. I get it. Everybody get it.
Yeah, if you're looking at it on a phone, Les, go to your view, and you probably want to see the side by side, and see if that helps you out.
Okay, I'll keep going, and I'll mess with it some while I'm listening.
Okay, thank you.
If it's been recorded, I can always go back and watch it again. So
Absolutely.
something I'm definitely interested in. I don't want to miss nothing.
Cool. Very
Thank you.
good. Thank you. Sorry about that, Danny. Go ahead.
That's fine. While we're paused here, does anybody have any questions so far? Nothing heard. We'll move on. All right. So we just discussed how we transfer the packet between nodes going across the mesh network. Now, one thing that makes a difference to this is if there is a node that is set to repeater mode. Let's see. Okay, so if there is a node set to repeater mode, repeater nodes get priority. So it's smart enough to know to send it to the repeater first because it should get a better range, a better coverage, because repeater nodes are supposed to be put at higher altitudes and use a better antenna so it has a better line of sight over the whole area to try to cover. Now, when it comes to the modes that you use, when you get your device and you set it up, it's going to be in client mode. One of the things that they did with this algorithm is they changed it to where instead of randomly picking 3 nodes to send it to first, they said, what we need to do is try to send it to the nodes furthest away from us so it has a better chance of reaching the target. So to determine, they didn't use GPS data, they decided to use signal strength, which in theory sounds good, but the problem with that is if you happen to have a node sitting on your desk at work and it's inside a building, maybe a metal building even, you're going to have a very low signal strength to the node that's trying to send the message, but you're not going to get out and reach. So they created what's called a client mute mode. So this is, you have a client, but if you select that, you'll be able to receive messages and send messages, but it won't use you to repeat messages. But the problem with that is getting people to use it. So I think that they, you know, not all devices have GPS on them. So that's probably why they went with the signal to noise ratio as their standard. But I think that that's still kind of flawed. All right, so let's talk about channels and how that's set up. So a channel isn't, you know, a specific frequency. For Meshtastic, it is using the whole ISM band. And it's centered around 906 when you first set it up, but it could use anywhere in there that it needs to. It divides it up into like 120, 114 slots that it could use for that communication. But channels isn't a channel like a frequency like you normally would think of. So a channel is it's kind of like with the new digital television. You might have one frequency that's sending it out, but you could have 5 channels on there. So it's done digitally instead of analog with frequency. So in a channel, you're going to have the channel index. You're allowed up to 8 channels, and it starts at 0 to 7. So it's a 0 base index. There's the primary channel. The primary channel is generally what's used for the public channel, and you normally don't want to change that. When you set up your device the first time, it's going to have that channel already set up for you. Unless you're doing something crazy, just leave the primary channel alone. Then the secondary channels is channels that you could create. So let's say we want to create a Rock Hill Meshtastic group, and we want to create a channel for that. So we could say add channel and change the channel name to Rock Hill Meshtastic or YCARS Meshtastic. And then for PSK, we could put in a key, and depending on the length of the key would determine if it's 128 or 256-bit encryption. There's also the downlink and the uplink that deals with MQTT. I'll get to that in a minute. But another thing to note is there's also a disabled channel. Now, disabled channels cannot come in between other channels, so it needs to go primary, secondary, another secondary, or however many you need, and then disabled channels. Now, as far as on the uplink and the downlink enabled, this deals with MQTT, which is using the internet as a backbone to send messages. MQTT is frowned upon on the public channel because it's going to flood the network, and it is a global channel. So we don't need to be texting back and forth between us and people over in Paris, France hearing it. So you never want MQTT on the public channel. So where would MQTT come into play? Okay, so let's say there is a Charlotte Meshtastic group currently. They have a Facebook page, and they're trying to set up a huge network to cover all of Charlotte with Meshtastic. We've also talked about doing something down here at Columbia to where, so now we have Columbia and Charlotte with Meshtastic nodes. And let's say we're getting a good coverage over all the town. But now let's say we want to create a Meshtastic group for South Carolina. So all of South Carolina could be in on that same channel. So then we could create a channel called South Carolina Meshtastic, create the key, share it out, and then we could enable the uplink and downlink with MQTT on one node in each of those cities to create a backbone. So if we message in Columbia, it could be received on the nodes in Charlotte. And that way you could interconnect major cities or smaller areas to build your Meshtastic network out larger. Any questions on that? Nothing heard. We'll move on. All right. So what is Meshtastic good for? Meshtastic's been around for quite a few years now, and development is definitely getting better, but this is definitely not going to replace. What was that?
Sorry.
But it's definitely not gonna replace modern communication anytime soon. But it does come in handy, I believe, at sporting events. Let's say you go to Charlotte Motor Speedway to watch a race. I don't know if you've been to any of the tracks, but cell phone coverage could be very spotty at those. And even their cell phone network can be flooded. They bring in what's called a mule, which is basically a portable cell phone tower with a generator to set up to try to offset some of that traffic so the network doesn't get flooded, but it doesn't always work right. And sometimes it can be flooded. Well, let's say, you go there with a bunch of your buddies, you could set up a private channel beforehand with your Meshtastic devices. Everybody has them. You could be walking around the facility and texting each other without having to rely on the grid. That gives you a complete off-grid texting experience. Sporting activities is definitely good for this. Outdoor activities where cell phone service could be sporadic. I'm not sure on this, so don't hold me to it, but I was reading somewhere that the original developers of the Meshtastic were fans of outdoor activities, especially paragliding. And they found that they would be paragliding into areas that didn't have cell phone coverage. So they created this as a way to send text of saying, hey, where are you? And also send their location to each other so they could try to meet back up once they land. So it's definitely good for that. And we're finding other uses as far as like using it on the farm to track farm equipment or track, hey, here's my combine, here's my trailer getting ready to pull up, tracking of equipment. I'm actually looking at a project to try to use it to where we can track some assets at work. So Meshtastic has some different uses like that. But like I said, everybody on YouTube's trying to advertise it as the next replacement for emergency communications. And I just don't think it's there yet. And I also think that it's going to be beat out by Starlink. Once Starlink starts doing their cell phone service, it's gonna be the king of communication, period, in emergencies. I know that's a hard pill to swallow, being amateur radio operators, but that's my opinion anyhow. There is a plethora of Meshtastic devices on the market, and many are coming on the market as we speak. I'm not going to say that I will say that I do recommend one, but let me go over a couple of them real quick. There's a couple of the popular ones is the LilyGos. The Rack Wireless seems to be the most popular in the Meshtastic community, mainly because they're using them to build remote solar nodes. So they're using a small battery, small solar panel, making it all contained device that they could put in different locations around the town to create little repeater nodes. And the Rack Wireless has support for some of that and seems to be the lowest power consumption device so far. The Heltec V3 that's in the upper left corner, those are great if you want to play around, try some different sensor data, stuff like that with them. And they seem to be some of the cheapest ones on the market right now. The one in the bottom right is the Seed Studio. I actually have one right here. It's their new card that it is weather resistant. But what I like about this is the price is really well. For $39, you're getting an out of the box Firmware is already loaded on it. All you got to do is connect it to your phone and go. It comes with GPS, temperature, 3-axis accelerometer. This device, I think, is probably the best deal on the market right now. They sent me one to test, and I've been enjoying carrying it with me. It's light, it's thin, it's easy. I don't want to get into too much on that, not trying to advertise for that. But there is a plethora of devices, and I'm not even covering the majority of them here. Now, one thing I love about the project is there is a lot of people involved in the development of this, and it is very modern technology. I'm sorry, but a lot of ham software out there is very outdated in technology. This isn't. This is the exact opposite. This has the latest cutting edge in technology is being applied to the Meshtastic project. So one example is the flasher. So when you get a device in, not the seed, but let's say you get another device, it's going to come without the firmware for Meshtastic installed. And usually the reason for that is when these devices first started, they're just LoRa devices used for other applications that's been ported over to use for Meshtastic. Meshtastic is constantly coming out with new firmware. The beta is where you want to be. The alpha is the experimental. I've been running alpha on a few devices with no issues, but there are some bugs in the alphas. But the beta seems to be very stable. So you get a device out. First thing you want to do is hook the antenna up. It's a radio that's transmitting and you don't know when it's transmitting. So you need that antenna so you don't burn it up. Hook the antenna up, and then you can plug it in USB to your computer. Open up a browser on your computer and go to flasher.meshtastic.org. From there, you could select your device, select the firmware version that you want to use, hit the flash, and it's smart enough to know what you connected. It'll pop up in the upper left, say, hey, which port do you want? Is this connected to? And you just say, it's port 3. And it'll detect what device you have and say, okay, you could just do this to flash, or you might need to go through steps. Like on the Seed Studio, I actually had to, excuse me, I actually had to transfer a file instead of going through the web uploader. I had to manually connect to it and transfer a file, but it will guide you step by step through it. They also have a great website that has very up-to-date documentation, and they're constantly any changes that's being updated on the website. And they also have a Discord group if you have any questions or need help with your device, not sure how to set it up. And there's many Facebook groups out there. So what about antennas? It's like ham radio. There's a million of them. Some are good, some aren't so good. They have their different uses. I don't think I have to get too in detail with this group, but it's going to come with the far right antenna. Little stubby antenna is usually what they come with. Some of your nicer units will come with the one right to the left of that, which is a little better of an antenna. A lot of people are using those. There's a gooseneck antenna that came out from Rack Wireless that everybody's talking about. It's really good. The Yagi in the bottom, I actually bought one of those. I bought it off AliExpress, got it from China. And my idea of that was I live on the outskirts of the metropolitan Columbia area. And if I want to connect to a node there to cover more of the Columbia area, I could just point towards there and then jump on the network over that. Very popular antenna over on the far left. That's the collinear. You see that used a lot for repeater nodes. And I will say on those repeater nodes, there are some very kamikaze repeater nodes going up around the area. They're camouflaging them, trying to put them in PVC pipes. I've heard of one guy putting one on a cell tower. I highly don't recommend you do that without permission. But they're hiding these things everywhere that they could get them up with some height. Another antenna is a loop antenna. That one's one that I hadn't seen, but just come across the other day that they're using those as well. Which one's the best? It depends on your application, what you're doing with it. If you're just going to be a client working off of the mesh network, one of the far right ones will work great. If you need a little more range, you go with one of the others. The only problem with that is if you pick that Yagi or you pick that collinear, you're probably going to be exceeding the ERP on this because the regulations is by the ERP, not by the wattage of the transmitter. Any questions on antennas? Nothing heard. We'll move on. What about cases? There are a billion cases out there, and there's some really good ones. Most of the cases are 3D printed. This is a very DIY project still so far. We do have a lot that are we're starting to see them come out from manufacturers ready to go, but these have primarily been DIY to start with. So people are 3D printing their cases. They're out there on all the 3D printing sites. You can download the files and print them. And there's some really cool ones. I like to say that Meshtastic is a gateway drug. And the reason for this is you start playing, people who have no experience with radio start playing with Meshtastic. It's the cool thing right now. It's all over the internet. But they start to learn skills. They learn off-grid communications, antenna design and use, frequency allocations, bandwidth, ERP, SWR. These are our skills. This is our bread and butter. That's what we do as amateur radio operators. So it only makes sense to me to, let people get excited about Meshtastic and support them in that. As amateur radio operators, we should always support anybody's enthusiasm in radio. But then, it never hurts to go, hey, you can reach even further out, and let me show you how, and start to bring them into that. Some ways to do that. I think as a club, a way that could be done is, why not, when we get our towers up, throw a node up on top of the tower, and you can put the name YCARS Meshtastic. YCARS is a very known name. I mean, you Google YCARS, you're going to find our website. You probably find our Facebook page. That's a great way to let the community know, hey, we're into Meshtastic too. And you might have some people reach out. I gave a presentation last week, and one of the guys commented and said, yeah, we had one guy come into our club because he saw we were using Meshtastic and wanted to know about it. And he became a tech. So he got his tech license. So I think it's a great way to try to get people more excited into radio. Meshtastic is what we do. It is one of the things we do. I mean, we have ways of doing that with what we do. And there's so much of it that crosses over. For more information about Meshtastic, if we haven't covered it here, if it's about a specific device and how something's working, I could try to help you out, but you're going to get faster results going to one of the Meshtastic Facebook groups or their Discord channel. But I highly suggest looking at the docs and their about pages. There's a lot of great information on Meshtastic that could fill in some of the gaps if I missed anything. They also have a list of community. There's community groups, just like we have our amateur radio club. They're starting to create clubs based around Meshtastic. There's an Austin Mesh, Chicago's got one. I think Seattle's got one. There's one out in California. They're popping up everywhere now. Meshtastic has definitely been around more in the UK first, and then just recently this past year, it's been exploding in popularity in the United States. It was so popular in the UK, so many people started using it that they actually started flooding the network. That's why some of these changes I was talking about earlier come about. They also saw that same thing happen at one of the hamventions. I think, I don't know if it was Orlando or the other, or Dayton, but they were using Meshtastic up there, and that network got flooded as well. So they're trying to work on the flooding algorithms to keep that from happening. But there is a lot of communities out there. There's a Meshtastic United States group on Facebook, and you got questions, you post on there. People are great and wanting to help. And that wraps it up, unless anybody has any questions.
Okay, folks, if you have questions, just go ahead and unmute and go ahead and get it to you.
And yeah, Daniel, North Carolina Mesh is widely active. And if you're interested in this, I would definitely look at Charlotte Meshtastic Group. There's some guys in there that are really pushing to want to cover Charlotte with Meshtastic, and there's some good guys up in that group.
Danny, how much does it cost to get into this thing?
You could get into this as low as $29 for a little Heltec V3 on Amazon. Mm-hmm. If you want to take your risks, some people have bought them as cheap as $12, $14. First one I got for $14 from AliExpress, free shipping, and it got here within a week. I know some people don't like to use AliExpress. Some people have had bad problems with it. I've had hit or miss success, but AliExpress has always refunded my money if a manufacturer didn't ship something like they were supposed to. Just always use a credit card so you could always dispute it if you have issues with it. But you can get the seed cap. I think they're coming off a pre-order now. The Seed Studio, it's the T1000E tracker. This is $39, and it's all you need out of the box. And like I said, it's weather resistant. The charger is magnetic. I actually have it down here. I'll show you. It actually connects magnetically.
That's cool.
And you could just throw this. I went to Florence Hamfest, do it in my back pocket. I took it to Shelby Hamfest. It's a great little device. Has
You're
everything
transmitting
you
out your
need in
butt.
it. If you try to build the Heltec out, I say it's more expensive to build a Heltec than it is to just buy this. But of course, a person in the comments said, well, if you buy everything from AliExpress, you could do it cheaper. Well, yeah, you could probably, but you still have to do it all, and not everybody wants to build it. But you could get into it that cheap, and you could spend money on it. People could spend up to $100, $200 on devices, depending on how crazy you want to get. I'm sure there's somebody who's, well, actually, I know there's some people doing more, because some people are trying to run amplifiers on it. If you get into the 433 megahertz range and use your amateur license and don't use the encryption, now you could use your limit on that. So you could put big amplifiers on there, and if you want one, I got one, I'll sell you, but you'll have to figure out how to key it. But you can put big amplifiers, and we're starting to see some people doing that, and it's a lot of cool projects going on with it.
Very cool. Anybody else have any questions?
And Daniel, you said the Heltec T114. Yeah, I've heard mixed reviews on that one. I don't know if it's quite ready to go. I didn't see a reason to switch to it from the Heltec V3. It did everything that could do. I mean, if you want a bigger screen, you could put one on it yourself. You don't need to go with that one. Listing of these available devices. Yeah, I could put together a list, and I could email it out on this presentation email.
Great. Thank you for that. Excuse me. Anybody else?
Yes. Theo, the LilyGo is very popular. A lot of people have had good success with those. I started down the Heltec route because I got into it when everything was sold out, and I was able to snag 2 or 3 of those. So I grabbed one of those. If not, I probably would have went with the LilyGo. I like that T-Deck. I think the T-Deck's what it's called. That one's a nice one. Or I probably went with the rack Wise Block.
Yeah. Have anybody else?
I have a question. Can y'all hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
If I have let's say a Heltec at the house, is the communication from user to user, or is it are there group chats, or I'm wondering if I were to buy one and set it up, am I just going to be staring at it, waiting on another user within my area to holler back at me? I'm a little confused about the communication that goes between each device.
Absolutely. We'll go over that again real quick. That's I might have kind of flew over that. That is definitely something. First, I would recommend, if you're going to get into this, depending on your area, if you're in the Rock Hill, Charlotte area, you're probably going to find somebody to talk to on the public channel. So like I said, when you get the device and you set it up from and first flash the firmware, the public channel is on there. And there's probably going to be other nodes. And when you fire up the device and you go to your computer, if there are other nodes, you'll see them in the list. You could click on them and message them in that public channel, and everybody can see those messages. Then you could create private channels if you want. So if you don't think there's going to be anybody around you to talk to, what you could do is buy 2 or 3 of these, give them out to some neighbors or friends or buddies, and create a private channel that you could message those individual people. So you could use this as there's like a public, kind of like a public group chat, or you could go into private messaging and direct message someone. But it uses the network to be able to send that direct message. So you could do it publicly or directly private messaging. Does that answer your question?
100%. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Anyone else? Going once?
Hey, Danny.
Yeah.
Hey, I got one for you. It's more my job to be the pot stirrer here. So why is it that amateur radio cannot use the encryption?
If you're asking that question, please go back and read the license manual. Amateur radio operators are not allowed to use encryption. It has to be unencrypted comms is what we're licensed for. Some people might say, yeah, but what about FT8 and stuff like that? Even though it's FT8, that can be decoded by anyone. It's a digital transmission. It's not encrypted, so to speak. It's a digital transmission that anyone could download the software and decode your message. So we're talking about encoding and decoding there, not encrypting. You're not allowed to do encryption as an amateur radio operator. Does that answer it?
Yeah, so what I was getting at there, and you stepped right on it, is that the reason for that is you're not allowed to obfuscate the message for the purpose of making it so others can't understand it. So the discussion that's being had now is that the long fast public channel uses a default, it is technically an encryption key, but it is a known standard encryption key, and the purpose is not the obfuscation of the message, more so it's the standard of entry into the mode of technology as similar to the digital mode of FT8. So there's a lot of discussion being had as to, can an amateur radio operator use the public long fast channel, because the intent is not to obscure the message.
As far as on the legality, the amateur radio operator can use the public long fast channel as long as they are staying within the wattage requirements. Let me go back up to that. As long as they're staying within the 1 watt, or the, more specifically the 30 dBm ERP, as long as they stay under that, they can use encryption. If they go above it, then they're not allowed to use encryption, and you're only allowed to do that on 433 megahertz. If you're going to use this and you want to use it with other Meshtastic users and you don't have a specific purpose, you want the 915 megahertz device. So if you buy one, make sure it's for the 915, because that is where the majority of people are. There's only a few people who are going to be running it in the 4033, and that would be hams. And if you're just trying to play with this, you want to get the 915 one. But yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point there. If a person was to, use encryption but make the key publicly available, and their idea is not to obscure, but I mean, that is what encryption is for. So that's an argument to be had. But as amateur radio operators, let's stay within our license and not use encryption. If you're using Meshtastic and you use it as a regular user, you're not using it as a ham radio operator, you're fine to use the encryption on there. You're not kept from using encryption just because you're a ham radio operator. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I was just interested in your position on that. It's a pretty hotly debated topic in the forums.
I don't see the purpose to encrypt it if you're going to just give it out there for everybody to decrypt. The whole purpose of encryption is to keep everybody from being able to read it. As far as, I don't think ham radio needs encryption.
Well, but that would defeat the purpose of the long fast channel, because it's technically encrypted.
Yes, it would. Yeah. I guess I don't understand what you're asking there then.
It was just more to stimulate discussion on it.
Yeah. It's good discussion, but I mean, not sure what you're asking. All right, we'll move on. Anybody else?
Anybody else? Well, I guess that's a no. So Danny, I really appreciate you doing this tonight. Thank you very much for a great presentation. Great information here, and just all around good stuff.